All right, today we're diving into the story of one of America's most prolific serial killers, and chances are you've probably never even heard his name. Now, this is a case the FBI considers one of its most significant, but it barely made a blip on the national news radar. So let's get into why that is.
Get this. Between 1997 and 2006, one man murdered at least 23 men in southern Louisiana. I mean, just to put that into perspective, a confirmed body count that high puts him in the same league as some of the most infamous serial killers you have heard of.
So it just begs the question, right? How does a killer this prolific operate for almost a decade without becoming a household name? How did he stay a ghost for so long? That's really the central mystery we're going to try and unpack here.
Okay, so to really get a grip on the crimes, we first have to understand the man behind them. Let's take a look at who Ronald Dominique was before he became a monster.
So here he is. This is Ronald Joseph Dominique. He was born and raised in Thibodaux, Louisiana. And, he looked like just any other guy you might pass on the street. But behind the scenes, his early life was already laying the groundwork for some serious isolation and resentment.
His childhood really follows this classic and tragic pattern of isolation. He was the youngest of 6 kids, and from what we know, he was bullied a lot for his weight and for just being a quiet kid. He was also struggling, totally in private, with his sexuality. After he dropped out of university, he just kind of drifted through low-skilled jobs, never really finding his place in the world.
And this is a really critical point, you guys. The violence didn't just come out of nowhere. If you look at his criminal record, there were crystal clear, escalating warning signs, years before he ever committed his first murder. Just look at this timeline of his early crimes. It shows a terrifying escalation. In 1985, it starts with the charge for sexual harassment over the phone. But fast forward to 1996, just 1 year before the murder started, he was arrested for the rape and attempted murder of a young man. The pattern was right there, and it was basically a preview of the absolute horror that was about to unfold.
And that brings us to 1997. This is when that pattern of violence just explodes into a nearly decade-long reign of terror across the Louisiana bayous. So to really understand how he got away with it for so long, we need to talk about his modus operandi, or MO. Basically, his specific repeated method. This consistency is what ultimately tied his crimes together, but man, it also shows a really chilling level of organization.
His method was just brutally consistent. He specifically targeted men who were often on the margins of society, young, African American, and gay. These were individuals he thought wouldn't be missed as much or whose cases wouldn't get the same priority. He'd lure them from bars or off the street with offers of money or drugs, take them back to his trailer, and then bind, rape, and strangle them. And by dumping their bodies in these remote, rural areas, he made it incredibly difficult for them to be found, which was a total nightmare for investigators. This timeline just really shows you how terrifyingly long his spree went on. It kicks off with his first confirmed murder in July 97. A year later, he's already escalating, adding bondage into his attacks. Now, for years, these were all seen as separate, isolated crimes. It wasn't until February 2005, think about that, years later, that police finally connected the dots and confirmed a single serial killer was operating. And even after that, he kept killing, right up until his last victim in October of 2006.
So yeah, for 9 whole years, this guy was a ghost. But as the bodies started piling up, law enforcement slowly began to connect the dots, and the net started to close in.
You have bodies showing up across 6 different parishes, all with a similar profile, all with the same cause of death. The pattern just became undeniable. It was clear this was the work of one person. The investigation got so big that local police had to hand the whole thing over to the FBI.
So, how do you finally catch a ghost? Well, it all came down to this chain of events. First, and this is huge, a brave survivor named Ricky Wallace actually escaped and gave the police Dominique's name. That led to him being brought in for questioning. And then came the massive break. He agreed to give a DNA sample. The lab came back with a direct match to DNA left at multiple crime scenes. The science was undeniable, and on December 1st, 2006, the hunt for the Bayou Strangler was finally over. So, with Dominique finally in handcuffs, the last chapter of this absolutely horrific story began to unfold. We were about to find out his motive and see his fate sealed for good.
And what happened next was just stunning. After nearly a decade of being the silent ghost, Dominic didn't fight it. He didn't deny anything. He just sat down with the investigators and confessed to everything, all 23 murders.
Which, of course, brings us to the biggest question of all, why? What could possibly motivate a man to do this, over and over and over again, for almost 10 years? His reason was so chillingly simple and just completely selfish. You see, after he got arrested for rape back in '96, he developed this intense fear of going back to prison. So he killed his victims for one reason and one reason only, to get rid of the witnesses to his crimes. It was a cold, calculated decision, all just to protect himself.
So, to avoid the death penalty, Dominique took a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder and got 8 consecutive life sentences. That means no possibility of parole, ever. The Bayou Strangler's reign of terror was officially, finally, over.
And that kind of brings us full circle, back to where we started. How did a man murder at least 23 people, almost all of them from marginalized communities, and just stay a ghost for an entire decade? You know, the answer probably isn't just about his methods. It's also about who he chose as his victims, and maybe who we as a society choose to see, and whose disappearances we choose to ignore. It's definitely something to think about.